Hi, we're sisters Elaine and Brenda.
Welcome to the Body Wealth Podcast, a space for conversation about the wealth that really matters.
Your best health. Welcome, Kathleen. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to this conversation, but how are you doing today?
Thank you both for having me. I'm doing good.
Well, we'd love for you to take a second, tell our listeners anything that you would like to about yourself.
So my name's Kathleen Isaac Campbell. I think the first thing that comes to mind is I'm a newlywed, though someone said I can't call myself that anymore. We just celebrated a year being married in August.
Congratulations.
But yes, I'm a wife, a daughter, sister, auntie. I have 7 godchildren. So I'm fully in that role. But what I do for a living is I am a clinical psychologist. I direct mental health services at a medical school. So we offer support to medical students, residents, and fellows. And I have a part-time private practice where I serve Black and Brown and LGBTQ plus individuals who are seeking support for all kinds of issues, but mainly trauma and health-related issues.
Oh, that's great. So we know that you experienced loss and grief early in your life. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. So I lost my mother when I was, it's interestingly, I kept saying 2, like almost my whole life, but my sister just let me know that I was actually 3.
You're too young to know.
My mother passed away. She had lung cancer. And my father passed away a few years later. He had raised us as a single parent, myself and my 3 siblings. And then he passed away when I was 10.
So
And he's had stomach cancer.
Wow. So where did you guys live after you lost both of your parents?
So it was actually a battle for some time. My dad had married about 2 years before he died. So we did have a stepmother. And there was some discussion about who would take care of us. So that in and of itself was stressful. I remember at the time, just like people coming up to me asking, like, who do you want to live with? And I'm like, I don't, and so like, and lots of just like discussions that ended up turning into arguments of how like who would. So I think it was clear that we weren't going to live with my stepmother, that there was some idea maybe we should all live with my grandmother, my mother's mother, who was still alive at the time. Ultimately, we ended up moving in with my uncle, who is my father's brother.
I mean, that has to be devastating and life-changing for a young child, of course, to lose both of their parents. What kind of feelings were you experiencing, I guess, more after your father died because you were so young when your mom died? But how do you remember dealing with your emotions at that time?
I'd say, looking back, probably not well. I remember learning about it. It was, my dad was a pastor, and so we always lived in like the church house that was next door. And so there was like kind of the groundskeeper for the church stopped by and broke the news to us in a way that was not like real sensitive. But like we had a half day from school, so I just happened to be home in the middle of the day and opened the door, and someone kind of let us know. And I just remember going up to my room by myself and just saying, I can't believe it. Like,
had he been sick?
Yeah. He went to the hospital like maybe a month or so prior with stomach pains. He had told us like, I'm not feeling great. And then he ended up getting admitted. We knew it was cancer. He had been operated on, but I think what was most shocking about it was we were told that everything had been successful and he was supposed to come home that day. And things just, I think, kind of turned around. And again, I don't know, maybe they didn't tell us all the information, but I think it's like for myself at that age, just kind of going from he's supposed to come home to he's not coming home, which I think was just a real shock. So I was not much of a crier, so I didn't really cry. Actually, at the funeral, I didn't. My sister was kind of breaking down. I had like a cousin of mine who was like my best friend at the time. I think she was more emotive than even I was. I just was kind of like there. I think just kind of taking it all in. I literally went to school the next day and just handed my teacher a note saying, sorry, I didn't do my homework. My dad died.
Oh my goodness.
I'm mad it could be just like not really being in touch with my emotions. I think even having lost my mom so early, it wasn't it was like a known fact, but like not something that we like spent time really like talking about or processing. So I think I just didn't have many good models for like what it looked like to express your emotions. It's just maybe my own personality too, just like how I just am somebody who kind of holds it together, so you wouldn't really know what they have going on.
I'm wondering, at that time, was there any grief counseling or any kind of counseling that helped you through that period?
Absolutely not. My family is from Haiti. There is I think, no awareness of mental health needs or support at all. And I think you get the like, oh, those poor kids, their dad died. And especially because my dad was a pastor, he's like well known. So it's like a lot of people knew. But I still think that there was no real sense of like, maybe this is hard for them and they might need like someone to talk to. That was not really a part of it. And even with all the upheaval, right, around like where we would live, just like, I think no real appreciation for what that must have been like. And maybe because we're kind of resilient kids, we just look like, okay, we're just kind of going along with everything.
So everybody was dealing with the logistics living rather than
Then
trying to deal with what you were feeling.
no. I think the person who got closest to some level of support was my older sister, because she went to a private school and a white school. So I think she had a counselor who she used to talk to about like just the adjustment moving in. She was 16 at the time. I think she was having a harder time just like kind of acclimating to a new environment. And I remember my uncle feeling really threatened by that. Like, you don't tell people your business.
Oh, yeah.
You don't talk about what's going on in the household. So it's like, I think my first example was like, oh, it's not trusted or it's not welcomed to even have like an outside space to talk about your feelings with anyone.
But you're a psychologist.
That's why I'm in the field. At some point, it kind of just hit me like, I feel like we were like let down here. Like, how come no one considered that it might be good for us to have some support or someone to talk to? And I think I spent a lot of time just watching how we all dealt with the loss, and even just like the adjustment to moving in, like living with my uncle. He was the father to like my favorite cousin at the time. And in some ways it was like, oh, this is cool, but it really wasn't all roses, I think, like kind of moving in and adjusting. And so just seeing how we all kind of navigated this loss made me curious about like, how do we cope? How am I coping? What would it have looked like if I did have someone? And so then I just thought about perhaps like pursuing a career where I could be that person for someone else, because I knew what it was like.
His house, was he married?
He was.
And he had one child or more?
Only one child. So she was initially quite excited to have siblings. And again, we were the same age, just like a few months apart. So it's like, oh, I get to move in with like my favorite cousin. But like immediately there were like clashes between himself and like my older sister. Because my dad was a pastor, he like was away for conferences and stuff all the time. So like we were kind of used to being home alone and having like women from the church come in and bring us dishes and things like that, like to just kind of look after us. So my uncle kind of described that as like, oh, you guys are just like living in some jungle, like all independent by yourself. We like civilized, which was not true. Like we were all like good kids.
Right. So he never had a teenager in his house either.
Yeah.
So just, everybody's having to make huge adjustments, and it's got to be difficult.
It was. And I think just like a memory I have is like just is kind of related to the way I processed emotions. Like, she was really affectionate, my cousin. I was not. And I had an aunt tell me like, you just need to act like her. But no one was like, I don't know what it's like. Like, I'm not just going to run up and hug somebody if I don't feel comfortable doing that, right? Like, if someone was more attuned, like perhaps they'd come and like see how I'm feeling, or like, try to like talk to me or make me feel comfortable, or come hug me, or like be like, how are you? How is this going for you? Like, no one ever provided any of that. And instead, I think we would get more judgment about like not being the kind of kids that they thought we should be, and that made things just a lot more difficult. I just coped with that by just trying to do the right thing all the time. I was the good kid who just followed the rules, because my sister was more likely to just ask questions. Not like she would say no, but she's just like, help me understand like why this rule's here. And they were like, oh, hell no.
So your sister was Brenda and you were me, for sure. So just take us through your you're graduating high school? How did the rest of that process until you actually left that house go?
I'd say for the most part, it was like fine. I think the hardest part again really was this conflict between my sister and my uncle because I think what ended up happening was he tried to, I think, sow some division between us, like kind of vilifying her as if like she's a bad seed, like she's a bad example for you all. And so like that I think was really difficult for us because we were all we had at the end. Right. So I was the goody two shoes. I did well. I was valedictorian. I was just like, did everything perfectly. Like that was just how I coped and survived in the house just by trying to do everything as right as I could.
And how were you feeling while you were doing all that perfection?
I think I was on autopilot. That's just
Okay.
that was my life. Yeah. It's like I didn't really know much else. I think somehow it's almost like you're not really awake or like aware of what's happening. Like you're just kind of like in survival mode and just doing that. Yeah. So I think that was my identity, was just like being the smart one, the good one. And I got a lot of, I think, accolades because of that. I was like always well regarded wherever I went. And that was like a good source of, I think, self-esteem and support that I was able to get too. I had a lot of good like mentorship and people who really poured into me. I went to public school, but I still managed to do pretty well, get into an Ivy League college. And so that was good. Yeah.
Do you feel like maybe there was a little bit of insecurity in the back of your mind knowing that, like, someone who wasn't your parent was taking care of you and was responsible for you, so you didn't wanna make them feel like maybe, "I don't wanna do this anymore"?
I'd say for sure. How conscious I was of that at the time, I don't know, but I do know like years later when I was processing it, I think a part of that, I came to this conclusion like, the people who love you unconditionally are like your parents. And then like when you're living with other people, there are going to be some conditions, right? So like we knew he was like, don't get pregnant, don't do that, So there was just like this really strict kind of household that we grew up in where we knew that like any kind of infraction, they were going to throw you out of the house. Like they were not as shy about saying that.
Oh, wow. That's stressful.
Yeah. And I think I don't know that I was so worried that I would do something that would like make them kick me out, but maybe that's how I responded, right? I was like, well, I'm just gonna not give them a reason. I'm just gonna right because I don't want to be in that position. And I think there was just the kind of dynamic we were in. There was just like a lot of like just talking about you negatively, like if you didn't do what they wanted you to do. Or I remember like I was young, I was a lot more vocal actually, like when I first moved into the house, like because I would notice things that were like discrepancies, especially when they're talking about my sister, and I'd be like, I would just ask questions and they were like, shut that down immediately. And so I think I was just like, okay, nobody really wants to hear the truth. So I'm just going to be quiet. I'm quiet. I follow the rules, do what I need to do. And like everyone will like me. And they did. Didn't leave space to like have any kind of like authentic experience because you're just like trying to walk on eggshells to make sure that everybody feels like you're doing the right thing. We've done so much to sacrifice for you, and you should be so grateful. And if you mess up, you're a bad person, kind of, or you're an asshole. And so that's just like a lot of pressure, I think, to live under when you're just trying to survive.
You sound like at some point you started processing it and giving yourself permission to look back and care for yourself in the ways that you needed. When did that happen?
I'd say in an intentional way, not till much later. Like I started therapy when I went to grad school. But I would say what maybe was the catalyst to start realizing like, oh, things can be different. I think it was when I got to college. I had a friend who I met during freshman year, and we were like, let's go to her house in her church for Easter. And then like I met her mother, and her mom was just like, I don't know why, but I love you already, or something like that. Like, very warm and like just embraced me as like a daughter immediately. And then through time, like we developed our own relationship. I lived with them over the summers. Like I was like, I don't want to go home. I want to stay in Philly because and so like I stayed in Philly with them and lived in their house, and they just like she like adopted me as her daughter, and her whole family did, and like I just saw how love was so freely given and actually not conditional, and I think that was really eye opening to me to realize like, oh, it didn't have to be the way it's been, and then I could kind of look back and seeing the difference. I think that really changed things for me. And so I started to reflect on things and just understand them a little bit differently. I didn't always have the words to describe, but I think the more time I spent like in therapy, by the time I went to therapy in my late 20s, that's when I had even more language and like understanding for what I was feeling at the time.
Well, shout out to your friend's mother.
You
She
did.
did what
I'm
adults
glad you
should do.
took her. Yeah. So do you feel like your early childhood experiences, how did they shape your adult life choices?
For a while, I was very focused on having a career as like a psychologist who worked with families who were dealing with cancer. It felt like, oh, I have this like lived experience. Not in the same way, people are touched by cancer in so many different ways, but like I think it just gave me some level of compassion and empathy that I thought would be useful. So I like did some research in cancer. I was like kind of positioning myself to really do that work. And part of what inspired me to be a psychologist in the first place was like not only like what I had been through, but I think realizing that because I had adopted this like kind of quiet, reserved personality, like people would come and talk to me about their issues. And so realizing like, oh, people seem to be comfortable talking to me. I should make a career out of this, and I should maybe bridge this experience that I had with early loss to like um, this career path and see kind of where it takes me. One would think I would want to work with children, but I think that felt like too close. Like I didn't understand what it meant to be a child because I felt like I had to grow up pretty fast actually. No one let me be a kid who like could break down about like my whole life has changed. Like that was just not a thing that I felt like I could really relate to. So I instead focused on working with adults. And you make your plans for life and God is like, well, this is something else. And so I ended up not doing cancer work at all. And so like I graduated from grad school. I did a fellowship in health psychology, still positioning myself for this role. A job opened up. They were like, oh, this is a brand new position that we're starting here for the medical school, just to see if people would want to treat like future providers. And I was like, it's not working with patients and families, but that might be just as important because like my work that I had been doing prior, a lot of times people would really just talk about these negative doctor interactions that they were having.
We hear that a lot, so you could have a bigger impact.
Sometimes working in the hospital, you'd see that doctors were really uncomfortable. Like, oh, the patient's crying. They need psych. And it's like, no, they don't. You just need like someone to be understanding. So we provide individual counseling and group. It's like short-term therapy. So for a lot of people, we're their first experience in therapy, like they've never been before. And so it can be really impactful to leave like a good first impression so that they're inspired to continue therapy going forward. I'd say like medicine is just a field that it brings in people who are very empathic and like want to change the world and help others. But like by the time you really get in it, it's almost like you're forced to separate your emotions from it in order to survive. Or that's how they think they need to survive. It's just like, don't feel anything, become a robot. So I see my position of trying to help people stay in touch with that human part of them. But you can have emotions, you can have feelings around this. Let's teach you how to cope with it rather than just cutting it off and putting it to the side.
Oh, that's so great.
I know. I hope that your service is something that's required of medical everybody, or is it just something that those who choose to
Not
come to see?
required. Certainly like self-selecting. So
Mm.
people who are just interested in it. And, something we would say, at least describe what we're doing as like a startup, because there weren't that many like formal programs for med students. Like most colleges and universities have some sort of counseling center, but medical schools didn't really have that. More and more you're seeing it. So we were one of the first kind of places to have like a real formal, like robust program like this. And like once we started it, these kids, they come in droves. And there's still some stigma here and there, but I think it's become a lot more normalized where people are like, yeah, my therapist said, and I remember when I first started, they had like a Black group chat and they're like, there's a Black psychologist. I find that like the most meaningful is like working with my students of color, my Black students. Because, they're coming into spaces where there are not a lot of people who look like them. And it's rough. Sometimes you're the first in your family to go to medical school. A lot of other students, they're, one of however many people who've been in medicine. And so like they just have a lot more resources. And so having a space where I can normalize what they're experiencing if they're dealing with racism and prejudice, like not gaslighting them or just being like, just push through, which some older doctors of color will tell you to do because that's what
Because that's what they had to do, right?
And show is just like, actually, no, that's not it anymore. We can.
Right, we found something better, right?
Well, we're so excited that you're doing that because um, you're touching those people, but you're also touching the people they touch. And
Yes.
those are the people that we talk to who may or may not have had, experiences where they didn't get the empathy or support that they would have wanted from their doctors. But we're also interested. So, your grief and your experiences as a child informed your career and your career
Yeah.
choices. But are there other ways that it affected your life and things that you chose to do or ways that you chose to live your life?
One thing I want to share is related to work, and then I'll answer that.
Sure.
What's been interesting is the number of students I've had lose a parent in the middle of training. So then it's put me right
Oh,
back to that place of having to
I'm sorry.
remember what it was like. And that's been sometimes a way for me to reprocess, like in times that I haven't. Sometimes they're a lot older, so they're like in their 20s, but it still is like so destabilizing, like right at the
Right.
peak of your development, and you're like just moving into adulthood and having to lose a parent. Like it's or have had parents that they lost earlier and they never got to process it. And so
Mhm.
I'm able to use my experience to also kind of help guide them like along that journey. And so I think that's been really impactful. In terms of just like other areas of my life, I think what I've been really working on is shedding this perfectionistic kind of overworked person that I became. Because I think I was not only good at a lot of things, I was smart, but I like if I tried something, I was good at it. A lot of it came from having to be independent, right? So I did my own hair. I did like everything I needed to do for myself, I could do. And so I had lots of kind of skills and talents, and people would kind of just see me as a leader, even though I wasn't trying to be a leader. I used to just try to like be in the corner disappearing, which is kind of like what I was trying to do at home too. Like if I could just blend in the background and be good, that's how I'll survive. And I would do that, and people would be like, "Wow, she's great. You should come and lead this thing." And so I always selected to like be in charge of something, and that led to me being really overcommitted.
But not being able to say no, was that
Definitely
something?
say no. So always good opportunities coming my way. And there was some point in grad school, a grad student told me, she's like, Kathleen, you know what your biggest issue is going to be is learning how to say no to good opportunities. And I was like, you're right. Still struggles with.
Have you conquered that yet?
I'm better now. Yeah. Actually, just had this morning, I had a meeting with somebody and I was like, thanks for the offer, but no.
Okay, good job.
Well, how were you able to do that? Because I know a lot of Black women have a hard time saying no.
My now husband, we were dating at the time, and he was just like, "Why are you doing so much?" And he's like, "All I hear you do is like complain about like these things. Like they seem to stress you out." And like right before I met him, maybe a year or so prior, I had been diagnosed with high blood pressure, and I was like, "Me?" And they were like, "Yeah, well, if you lead a stressful lifestyle, these are all things that can contribute to it." And I'm like, "I'm gonna eat right and do all the right things." And that's gonna like eliminate it. I can overcome this. And it didn't. No matter what I did, I still had to be on these meds. So he met me, kind of knew that I had high blood pressure, and then he'd see me be stressed out with all the things I was juggling. And he was just like, this is just not okay. You gotta slow down, you gotta rest. But like in the pandemic, that was like a boom for mental health need, right? And so like I was working like nonstop. It was great for business. But it also meant like here I am, like just working, like I had my day job, I had a private practice, and the things that I'm having to process with people, like I'm having a hard time being alone to I lost somebody. Like, there's just like a lot to hold and carry. And on top of that, I'm like involved in all these different organizations and doing all these things. And so like just never having a real moment to stop and rest. And like having someone just remind you, like, you want to be here, right? You need to slow down. And I had some colleagues of mine say something similar. They had introduced me to the Nat Bishop, who talks about rest as resistance. Like, you might need this. And so it was like kind of a combination of things, like multiple messaging from people that cared about me, finally kind of inspired me to start looking at what am I doing? Do I even enjoy what I'm doing? Is this like pouring into me, or is it pulling away? Is it making me feel stressed? And so I started to invite people to think about what it would look like to really like nurture and mentor me. And not that I hadn't gotten mentoring before, but like to really let me slow down and enjoy life and have a slower progression into some of these things rather than just being thrust into having to take the lead all the time. And so positioned to take over this training program. And I was just like, my blood pressure can't take it. I feel more stressed than anything. I can't do it. I just dropped it. So I was like, I'm not gonna do it. And they're like, it's fine, we'll figure it out. And they did. And so like with that and seeing that like I could say no and like even if people are disappointed, nothing crazy happens.
They'll be fine.
Nobody died. That's empowered me to keep saying no and like really be more intentional about what's serving me. What am I actually passionate about? Now it is like taking a step back now that I've said no to a lot of things and have a little more free time to really consider like what do I actually want to do?
What brings you joy?
I really used to love singing. I wanted to be a singer. So I joined the choir at my former church. I've moved now. So I'm about to join this new church. So I'm like, oh, I want to join the choir. I used to sing out loud all the time. I remember just being a teenager and just like having time to just like really enjoy something. So that's what I'm trying to get back into. I also loved cooking. So yeah, just like getting back to being like excited about like trying, those new things. Like I've done the things that I've wanted to do. I've like purchased a home, I'm married, we're trying to have a family. Like that's what I want to do now. Like just focus on like building my own family. Like I've had to, kind of set certain limits and boundaries. And some of that has been like not trying to pour into relationships that weren't serving me either. And so like that included family. Like I spent a lot of time trying to be the good one and keep the connection going with my uncle and, others, for example. And over time I was like, they're not really giving me the same energy back. So why am I doing like what relationships bring me joy? Like ones that don't feel like work or a burden, or I'm trying to prove something to someone that it's like, I feel like you genuinely care about me and I care about you. And so that's been really exciting.
It sounds like you're in a great place. Is there any way that you think grief still shows up in your life?
In some ways, I would say I still haven't really grieved. As much as I've spent years now in therapy, like processing it, I think, and I don't know, I was like, sometimes I'm like, would grief be me like just finally breaking down and crying for like a really long time about it? I don't know. But like, I think there's like, just,
Yeah,
I don't know there's no supposed to in it. That much I know.
right.
I do think that like really tapping into what this has meant for me is important. And I think I've something I want to do is have more of a sense of connection to my parents. A fun fact you should know is I bought this house that I'm living in now. And it wasn't until I was already here that I learned that my mom is buried 5 minutes away. Yeah, but we didn't grow up visiting like that. So I like didn't really and so someone called us here, and so, like, now I have opportunities, like, I should go visit their grave. Just seeing that as, like, a way to honor their, like, existence, and, um, it's hard to get my siblings to do it. I would love for us to, like, have times where we kind of reminisce or, like, just talk about them to just keep their memory alive. We had just so many things that were interrupted for us that I want us to, like, reclaim some process of, like, and I think that will be part of not, like, grief per se, but, like, just a way of acknowledging like what we've been through. We have a very strong relationship, me and my siblings. We all take care of each other. We're doing well. So I think that's been great. I did my Philly mom, Pat, she printed a picture of them for me that I had. I had it on display at the wedding and now I have it hanging up in my household. And so like that's just things that we didn't have before. Like we grew up like without just like a picture of them around.
Wow.
Like, just those are things that really interrupted a grieving process for us, like, just finding ways to honor their memory and who they were. And, like, yeah, as I'm crafting my own family, like, trying to keep that alive and be really intentional about that, I think is a way for me to continue to, like, work through the grief and let it just be a part of my story. It doesn't have to be, like, a sad thing that I, like, shy away from.
And I also think you and your siblings should share stories because it was so set aside.
Yeah.
Even Elaine and I have realized that even though we're only a year apart, we remember different things from our childhood. So to the extent that you can come together and tell stories to each other about your mom or your dad, I think that will enrich your not necessarily grieving experience, but just your experience of bringing them into your present.
And I know you said you're thinking about a family. Has your experience how does that inform the way you think about your own future children?
I certainly want them to feel loved, and I want to create like an environment where they um, can just express themselves in the way that they need to, like to not try to mold them into who I think they should be, but like just let them kind of be themselves. Something that is a little challenging for me is I have this worry, like, what if I die early too? And so, like, almost like I want to give them as best of a life as possible. Because the crazy thing is, even though he was only here for 10 years, I feel like my dad like really did a lot in like just kind of like setting a really strong foundation, giving us really good memories. Like we had a childhood, we used to go to the beach, like we just did like all kinds of things. And I'm like, that was fun. You can make a big difference even if you don't have a lot of time. And again, God willing, I'll be here for a long time. But it's not like I want to just give them like the best childhood possible. And
Well,
so
like
I
what you said, like what you wanted was unconditional love. So your children don't feel like that there's something they could do that would make you stop loving them. Good. What advice would you have for another Black woman moving through life after the loss of a parents at a young age?
I'd say that grief and healing is a journey. It's your own journey. There are no kind of supposed tos in it, but what's most important is like just giving yourself the space, the time and space to really feel all that you feel about it. And even if you don't know how you feel, that's also okay. Like that's part of the process. Cause I think for me, I spent a lot of time being like, maybe I should cry and judging myself for not being like more emotional about things. But I'm like, that's just how I processed it. And maybe that's how I needed to survive. So letting that be okay and just realizing that we have different stages of life and like it'll come up in different ways and like just honoring that when it does has, been really helpful for me. It also helps to have like some community or support. So if it's a therapist or if it's just a close friend, somebody who gets it, who can, you know, talk to you and not try to just make you feel better. I think that's also important. A lot of times in our community, we just want people to like, we're trying to help.
Right, gloss over it and just keep going.
I got so much, you're so resilient, you're so strong. And I was like, sometimes I don't feel that strong,
Right.
actually. I want to try to connect with the part of me that doesn't feel strong all the time.
And we don't wanna have to be strong all the time. It it's not good for us.
And I think a lot of Black women are put in that position where it's like you're just expected to hold it together all the time. And it's okay to fall apart. So, like, I'm trying
Mhm.
to do that more and more and hope that other people give themselves the space to do that too.
Great advice. How do you think being a Black woman impacted your experience?
I'd say on one hand, like I was raised to have a strong sense of like my identity, particularly as like a Haitian woman, because we were just like we're the first free republic. Like we are, we are
Mhm.
proud of who we are and our heritage. So I think that really contributed to this sense of like resilience and strength that I've always carried. So that's been an asset, and at times its own liability. So like I think when I think about being a Black woman, I think it's that duality and a lot of times people don't appreciate the duality that exists. And I think that's what I've been working on is trying to like find more of that balance so that I'm not always like strong and having to hold it together and be perfect.
What would you need from a healthcare provider to feel well cared for?
For me, it's listening to me and what I'm saying, not like, and I guess, people are busy. There's a lot going on, but like I like to feel heard and understood. And I think any provider who even in the limited time that they have, is as attentive and as attuned as they can be. The whatever capacity they have for that, it's really important to like hear someone out. Like if I feel dismissed or if I feel like I'm being rushed along or like my questions aren't being like considered thoughtfully, that doesn't make me feel cared for. And so that's something that I'm looking for, kind of in my providers. Um, it's always great when someone remembers something about me too. Like my primary care provider would be like, wait, like she'll ask me about my relationship when I was dating. I think just remembering that the humanity, like it can get really repetitive, the work that they're doing. But I think like recognize like this is a human being who likely has their own anxieties and worries standing in front of you. Like whatever you can do to make them feel like calm, safe, understood, and heard goes a long way, even if you don't have the answers. I think that's probably even more healing.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate you.
Thank you both.
Thanks for listening. Want to hear our take on this conversation? Check out our After the Show episode right here. For resources related to today's topic, see the show notes.
If you want to support Body Wealth, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. We'd also love it if you give us a 5-star rating and write a review letting us know what you love about the show.
The Body Wealth podcast shares personal stories to inspire you. It does not constitute medical advice. For that, we encourage you to work with a trusted healthcare provider. We also want to remind you that the views expressed by our guests are their own.
This podcast is dedicated to our mother, Jean Fernandez Barbour, who showed us what advocating for yourself really looks like.